I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Dwayne Monroe, a cloud architect, Marxist tech analyst, and internet polemicist, focused on directing his almost 20 years of experience in the technology space towards a materialist analysis of the tech industry, informed by a mixture of theory and direct experience. In recent years, he has devoted time to dissecting the political economy of what he calls the AI industrial complex, the topic of a blog post and upcoming book called Attack Mannequins. You can follow him at Twitter at Cloud Quistador, that's CloudQuistador, at Cloud Quistador at Twitter, and visit his website and blog, monroelab.net, that's MONROELAB.net. Before we get started, I also want to mention that coming up this Sunday, my class, The Unconscious Act, Theories of Repetition in Philosophy and Psychoanalysis, begins at GCAS. The class is being held on the next 4 Sundays, beginning this Sunday, March 6th, at 12 p.m. New York City time. All classes are live via Zoom, and when you register, you can find in the Google Classroom all of the readings. I've copied them all for you, so they're available there. You don't have to buy any books. And I've recorded 4 videos. You watch one of each of them before each class, so we can discuss the material presented in the videos as well as in the readings. This Sunday, for example, we're going to be reading Freud, and we're going to be talking a little bit more generally about interest in psychoanalysis, questions about Freud, and questions about the field in general, just to get acquainted with each other and with the course. Then the following week, on March 13th, we're going to be reading a paper that talks about different influences Freud took or had from Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. And we're going to talk about different concepts in Freud as well as in Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, and see how it all fits together, even though Freud never really acknowledged that this is where he was getting information. It seems pretty obvious given his writing and given the times he lived in. Nietzsche and Schopenhauer were big influences on culture, and it would be strange for Freud not to have encountered them. Then the following week, on March 20th, we're going to talk about other theories of repetition, being some in Lacan, some in Deleuze, and Alenka Zupanchik's writing about that. And then finally, the 4th week, we're going to be talking on March 27th about the theater and plays and the theater of the internet and the digital realm, and how we can kind of see psychoanalytic concepts playing out in the theater, film, digital realm. We're going to be reading some of Simon Critchley's work in that area, and as well as Clint Burnham, Does the Internet Have an Unconscious? So definitely come and join us, check it out. You do not have to be a psychoanalyst in formation to take this course. The course is open to anybody that's interested in the topic. GCAS does have a psychoanalytic certificate program that you can sign up for, and if you'd like to do that, you are welcome to begin your sort of academic year now. Sign up for the certificate now, and then you have the entire year from this point forward. You don't have to begin the academic year at GCAS in the fall, as in most institutions. So that's something really great. You can begin your education at any time. They also, even though their fees are really low for education, they also are very good about providing financial assistance and letting you get the education you want, really no matter what your finances. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to write me. Feel free to contact GCAS directly. Their website is gcascollege.ie. That's GCAS college.ie. And for my class in particular, it's gclasscollege.ie/the unconscious act. It's the with a dash, unconscious with a dash act. And you can find links to all of this in the text accompanying this episode, as always. Also, as always, this episode is available on YouTube. So if you'd like to access the transcript or watch Dwayne and I in conversation, just go to Trapart Film's YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/C/Trapart Film. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can visit Patreon. It's patreon.com/Vanessa23Carl. Patreon.com/Vanessa23Carl. Thank you so much to all of our Patreon supporters. I really, really appreciate seeing your names there. It really helps a lot to feel supported back. Well, I think that was a good place to start. I'm really excited to talk with you because I think about the tech industry a lot and I don't know a lot about it. And I'm always trying to learn more because, like you said, there's a lot of disinformation out there. And everyone needs to be thinking about this and educating themselves, I feel like, on politics and on technology because they're so important and they're pervasive and they don't get questioned enough, especially technology. It reminds me a lot of I feel like we're living in a time similar to like the Industrial Revolution, where like all this group of guys got to like create society and like mine the earth, and like no one else really had a say in what was going on. It feels like it's kind of Industrial Revolution Part 2, but with tech.
I think that's exactly correct. I mean, so to, I guess, define what my project is in this area, well, just to say who I am. So, hi, Dwayne Monroe, and I'm a technologist, and I've been in the technology field for about 20 years. And in that capacity, I've worked with what are called enterprise scale technologies. First, on premises, and what does that mean? Well, that means within the data centers of large corporations. Data centers are essentially buildings that warehouse computers, high performance computers, and everything that the computers use to communicate with each other, networking equipment and storage equipment and so forth. And I moved my career about a decade ago or so to cloud technologies. So what are cloud technologies? Well, cloud technologies are what I just described, data center technologies, or the concentration of computing power within data centers. But now, rather than a company having to have their own data center, they can rent access to the elements of compute, storage, and database from another provider. The three majors from North America are Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. And what my project is basically an interrogation of what these companies are doing, specifically, but more broadly, what the technology industry is doing in relation to power. Because my idea is that computation is a form of power. It's actually at the center of capitalist power. It's logistics and command and control. And I find that many people on the left and other thinkers accept the narrative that is presented by the industry without question. So when someone says, we've created an autonomous car, people say, oh, well, I guess you have, rather than, well, wait, have you? And it's my contention that the companies that are doing these things they know that they haven't done the things that they've claimed, but they are presenting these achievements as having been accomplished for both business reasons, because it attracts investment, but also for propaganda reasons, because in order to shape the narrative of what is possible, in order to have an influence upon labor power. So anyway, that's, I guess, kind of a overview of what I do in the space as far as my, I guess you could say, polemics on technology.
And you're working on a book. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
So the book is called Attack Mannequins, AI as Propaganda. And the subject of the book is how the concept of artificial intelligence is being used by the tech industry generally to, as I said, shape how we understand labor. So, for example, Amazon, one of their goals is to create robots within their warehouses so they could replace workers. But creating the kind of robots that they need is not really achievable with current technology. So they present the idea that these things are achievable, and it's my contention that presenting the idea that this technology is possible is designed to give labor the impression, to give workers the impression that they can be replaced, thereby weakening perceptually your bargaining position. And there are other such examples of the presentation of technologies that either have not been achieved or cannot be achieved as presented. But the attack vector, so to speak, or the attack target, I should say, is labor. One of them is when Professor Jeffrey Hinton mentioned a number of years ago that machine learning was sophisticated enough so that it could replace radiologists. And this was, just not a true claim. His intention might very well have been sincere. He was a very enthusiastic scientist and researcher. However, that claim could be used in order to try to have an impact upon the prospects and the wages and so forth of radiologists. Now, as it happens, we need even more radiologists because machine learning cannot replace people. But the presentation of the idea that people can be replaced is what I'm saying is a propaganda campaign. And I call the tech mannequins because these lifeless things are being used by capital to attack us, to attack our position of power, such as it is, because we don't have that much power as it is.
Yeah, but like you said, it really kind of weakens the person's perception of their position,
of their worth,
which
yes.
makes them feel they have less autonomy and less agency and less of a say.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so that's the subject of the book, and it's always 6 months away. I'm sure you know how it is to write a book, but but I do anticipate it being completed by the midpoint of this year, and then we have to get it published.
Yeah, so it'll be out probably next year, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That would be the goal. Yeah.
I look forward to that. And in the meantime, people have your blog, which is also excellent.
Yeah, thank you. The blog is titled Computational Impacts, and as the title implies, the purpose of it is to is to describe the impacts of technology and technology industry on people. So, for example, there has been a proliferation of algorithmic systems, which are known as AI, but which are actually pattern matching systems. That's really what we're talking about. AI is an aspirational term that was coined in the late 1950s at Dartmouth College at a conference by, I think it was Dr. John McCarthy. So well over half a century ago. And what we have today are pattern matching systems, everything that impresses us, so like Siri and what have you. These are all pattern matching systems that use a tremendous amount of computational power and storage to achieve their results. But really, it's all the stats that you learned in middle school, high school, and college or university. Um, what I do with the blog is I dissect claims. So, for example, when a company like Boston Dynamics says, "Oh, we've invented a robot that can walk and do all these things," I said, "Well, let's actually investigate the claims. Let's return to the materiality of the technology to investigate whether the claim in the press release matches what is actually happening." And 99.9% of the time, that is in fact not the case. Like you're saying, "Oh, we've invented this or we've done that." Um, and I see the blog, hopefully, the intention is for it to be a resource for people who are not familiar with the technology, but who want to understand, well, these claims are being made and they sound astounding, but are they true? And who is there to tell me whether they are or aren't? Because the tech press is in this way useless because they're just cheerleaders. And of course, the companies are going to tell you whatever they want you to believe. So that's the purpose of the blog. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's so important, like you said, because if all the information is just coming from these people who have invented these things, then it's not really information that you can trust.
Precisely. I mean, they're trying to sell you something, number one, and they're trying to also sell you an idea, in addition to selling you the actual stack. And an example of this are companies that claim that they can determine through machine learning or artificial intelligence whether someone is cheating, like the proctoring platforms that have been vexing universities and colleges and even high schools, in which people are taking tests and then they use these algorithmic systems that are supposed to be able to monitor your facial expressions and then determine whether or not you're cheating. This is absurd, of course, and it's also dangerous because um, if the idea that such a thing is possible is accepted, then schools will deploy these technologies, and then these technologies have a negative impact upon people's lives. So you have a couple of things. You have a system that cannot do, I mean, even if it could do what they claimed, it would be wrong, but it can't do what they claim. And so not only is it wrong, but it's harmful in a way that's multiplied by the fact that it cannot achieve the stated goals. So this is why it's so important to have a skepticism, but an informed skepticism about what's possible with various technologies, because they do produce harms when they are deployed, like insurance determination systems, benefit determination algorithms. There's so many examples now of this proliferation of these algorithmic systems, that are being marketed as worthy of decision making, of replacing people in the decision making process, and they absolutely cannot do it, and should not be used in that way. But they are, because it's a labor saver for the bureaucracies, the companies that replace personnel with these systems, and it's also a way of obscuring culpability for the harm being done. So yeah, this is why I'm so focused on this, because I think it's having an impact on all of our lives. It starts with the most vulnerable, but these systems always creep out. These harm always creeps out in a concentric circles of harm, from the most vulnerable to all but the most powerful, who are always excluded, of course. And so we need to be aware.
Yeah, exactly. And the environmental impact as well. You recently
Oh my
posted a
God.
picture of like what does a cloud or something look like, and it's like this
Yeah.
huge thing of cables, and it's just like
Yeah,
these cloud
exactly.
is not it's not a cloud,
There is no cloud. It's all plastic and metal and silicon and power consumption and cooling and yeah, just buildings with computers. And there's nothing magical happening. In fact, you mentioned the Industrial Revolution. It is an industrial process. That's really what it is. But the way that we think about it is as if it's different from, say, the steam engine. Now, in details, it's different, but fundamentally, it's the same. It's the same kind of industrial process. You have to mine, minerals from the earth to actually which requires labor and typically exploited labor, to create computers. And then there's, of course, software, which is our instruction sets. But It's not magic. It's things that can be comprehended if someone takes the time to explain it. But the entire thing is indeed an industrial process. And once you understand that, then you can still be impressed by the achievements of the computer age, but you have an appreciation for it that's not that of a small child, but that of an informed adult who's like, I'm not going to worship at the altar of this. I just have to understand what's going on because it has an impact.
Yeah, exactly. And not just be excited by the short term quote unquote benefits, but also
Yeah.
look at what's going on long term.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely. Yeah.
And you also talk about like materialism and technology. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so my approach to the technology industry is based in a materialist understanding of, well, of history itself, which of course is the actually existing conditions, the stuff that people have to work with, the conditions that they find themselves in, but also, as we mentioned only a little while ago, the fact that computation is at its heart an industrial process. And once you demystify um, computation and demystify, the process of software, well, then you place it more properly within the overall system of industrial and economic process within political economy, rather than outside of it, because the tech industry presents itself as being outside of political economy, like they're above it. They're innovators. They're living in tomorrow. And we're seeing this now with, for example, the push for Bitcoin and crypto. When you push back against these things, many people will say, well, you're afraid of the future. They're just presenting this vague, nebulous idea of a future. And the only reason it seems futuristic is because because there's lots of complex computational power involved. But then when you peel away, or you open the curtains, and what you see are racks of computers running, consuming energy and doing cryptographic calculations. As I said, very industrial, very material, right? And so the more that you focus on that, the more it makes sense to you, or rather, the less likely you are to be fooled by the propaganda campaign, because you then return to the foundation, which is the materiality of computation. And then you look at the impact, the environmental impact, the energy impact, the impact on labor, and as we mentioned a little while ago, the impact on our lives, by the use of systems to make decisions that have an impact upon our prospects.
Yeah, and it made me think of like I'm at least old enough, my early 20s was the early 2000s, and we built our computers still, like we
That's
didn't
right.
just have like a MacBook or whatever, like actually like bought the hard drive and like, well, my boyfriend at the time or whatever built my computer for me. But I remember like putting it together and choosing the parts and that kind of thing. And I'm thinking for people that are younger that might have been born in the early 2000s, this must really seem, first of all, like second nature, of course, they've grown up with it, but also
Mm-hmm.
like it's just like seamlessly part of life, and maybe don't have that kind of view of this being a machine in that way.
You make a really good point, because I think one of the reasons that I have the view that I do, and why it comes naturally to me, is because I've been in this field for 2 decades. And I started my work like in the actual super cold data centers, cutting my hands as I rack servers, in racks, and running cables, and working with actual engineers who built these systems and so forth. Um, so it's impossible for me. For me to abstract it. However, if you are younger and you do not have that experience, and what you see is, the Twitter app or whatever, and you don't see that, and you don't know that behind the Twitter app is data centers, running a platform, running, a massive scalable website. I think it's possible for you to be led down some wrong paths. Or you don't have to be very young. You also can be a person who just doesn't have the experience of exactly what you described, a kit computer, putting it together, because when you did that, you had a sense of it's a machine. No one could have told you, well, you know what, Vanessa, this is a magical box. You're like, well, it came from a store and I had to put it together. So I don't know how much magic I have to actually build myself. In the same way that, if you had other kits, and you put them together, you had a sense of the actual materiality of the thing. So that's another reason why I feel like a special responsibility to speak out about this, because I know that my concern is that this is a fading understanding as we get older, and there's more people who do not, even working in the tech industry, who don't have this background, and who don't have the ability to just visualize immediately what's actually happening behind the scenes. So I also feel like a special responsibility to, while I'm able to, and I'm still bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, to build a legacy of critique.
Yeah, it's really needed. People need to critique these things more. And I feel like there's so many different ways I can go because there's so many different things that I'm interested in hearing your point of view about. But what do you think about this kind of Elon Musk saying we're going to Mars sort of thing?
So, there's actually possible to go pretty deep with that, because there's a couple of layers with the whole Musk story. There's the business grift layer, because an analysis of Musk's business dealings reveals several things, that he didn't found Tesla, for example. It was taken from Eberhard, and I forget the name of the other co-founder who actually invented the Tesla Roadster. That the rockets that land themselves is the completion of work that was started in the 1990s by, I believe it was McDonnell Douglas. Various things like that. Starlink is kind of a boondoggle of an idea, because the idea is to orbit 45,000 satellites, but then replace 5% of them every year. I mean, just at a practical level, it sounds like pure madness. But then the question is, why are people so enthusiastic, and why are so many men so enthusiastic about this? And this is the psychological aspect of this, that I find curious, or that I'm very curious about. My theory, my idea, I should say, not to be too vainglorious about it. My idea, based upon talking to some people, is that we've lost an idea of a future. And so what Musk is doing, and others like him, Bezos does this as well, is present a kind of old-fashioned future, like space colonization and robots and all these things. And that fills the gap of the future that people feel that we've lost, because climate change looms over all of us, even though we suppress on a daily basis as we make our coffee or whatever. We suppress our knowledge of that. And so people feel a need for a future. And also, I think a lot of men in particular, this is just my idea, but a lot of men in particular, I think the idea of a heroic man doing these things, saving the world, appeals to a certain mythological idea of what a man is supposed to be in Western society. Now, at the practical level, things like going to Mars. Well, Mars is fine for robots, but for people, there are many, many, many problems, such as the fact that Mars is a radioactive wasteland, and that you have to bring everything with you, and it's a very unforgiving environment. And unforgiving is putting it mildly. It's not for living things. It is not a place for living things. And the idea that humanity's task is to build an environment on a planet like Mars shows not imagination as it's presented, but a failure of imagination, because it's an old science fiction dream from, my God, the 1940s or 1950s that's just carried on to the present day, maybe even the 19th century. It's carried on to the present day, but the practicalities prevent that from actually happening. But the dream is still appealing because it's less taxing, I think, to our mythological fixations than saying, what do we need to do to actually fix the earth? And to fix the earth means we have to deal with power. And to deal with power means that we might have to go hard on some people who deserve that we go hard on them, like the hydrocarbon cartel. And who wants to think about that? You'd rather think that, oh, I'm going to go into this lovely spaceship and land on Mars, and I'll be a pioneer, and it'll all be very exciting. And yeah, so I think that that's a big part of the Musk story, is that he is a grifter who's taking advantage of these ideas that are afloat in our society. I mean, Vanessa, what was it last year sometime when Musk announced that he was in the process of building a humanoid robot, as it was called, and it was just a person in a spandex suit dancing around. And I was struck by the fact that even that very obvious bit of nonsense did not break the spell of the people who are the most ardent fans, because for the spell to be broken, they then have to go down an entire chain of spells to be broken, to decouple. I mean, you as a person who's a scholar of Freud's work and Lacan's work, you understand this better than I do. But there's just this whole complex of belief that there has to be unraveled for them to, to go, oh, well, Musk really is a grifter. And so it's to me, it's actually quite sad, because it's people who desperately want and need to have a sense that there will be some kind of viable future, but they have found the wrong target, sadly, for their hopes.
Yeah, because there won't be if they keep it up in that direction.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah. And Mars is so inhospitable. It's also ironic that you would just fly right past the moon, which you could conceivably build a little facility on it, which is only a couple of days away from Earth. So if you wanted to do something like that, it's just to play the game for a minute. If you wanted to do something like that, wouldn't you just build a little facility on the moon? It's like, oh, Susan broke her leg. Oh, don't worry, we can get a ship to you in 2 days. As opposed to, oh, you're on Mars. Oh, okay, good luck. So even from as I say, a purely practical point of view, it's just an absurd idea. And so we have to, I think, ask ourselves, those of us who are skeptical, or I would say who know better, we have to ask ourselves, but why do so many people believe these things? Why are they so eager to believe? And to me, that's the more interesting question, because I mean, Musk, I just know that he's just a chiseler, but why are so many people eager to believe him? Why was P.T. Barnum right? I guess is the key question.
Totally. And that's why I know you love Isabel's book as well. That's why
Yes.
Isabel Miller's book is so great, because she
Yes.
really tears apart these things psychoanalytically and
Yes.
into philosophy.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And it's exactly the kind of thing that's needed, I think, to balance out, my work of dissecting the actual mechanics of it. But then, because I understand that there's also like this, the psychoanalytic aspect that has to be explored. I'm very appreciative of that work and your work and the work of others who are actually trying to, to explore this aspect of it, because it's difficult to know how to help people who are so deep down a rabbit hole. I mean, how many videos are we going to see of Teslas almost driving into people in alleged full self-driving mode? Like the car is just going completely bonkers. It doesn't work, obviously, and it's not going to work, but and it's not going to work.
But why do you want it to work?
And why would you even want it to work?
Just teach people to drive the car.
Yeah. Or let's just build some trains. I mean, it's astounding, right? Like
trains would be great for the United States.
Yeah, it'd be like the most astoundingly complicated so-called solution to solve problems. And I think that one of the reasons there's an economic reason, which is that if I'm a company, I'm able to sell you this remarkably complicated system. Well, guess what? I'm going to make a lot of money, especially if it doesn't work, because under the contract, I just have to keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. But the simplest
you have
answer,
to keep buying new cars or whatever.
Exactly, or to get it fixed, or like Tesla charging people tens of thousands to fix the problems that are caused by the fact that the systems don't work. But the simplest, most human-centered solutions, of course, are not profitable, which is why they have to be public goods services as opposed to for-profit entities like rail and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm even more frustrated than usual lately because of what we also talked about on Twitter with this, like, I feel like at the beginning of the pandemic we had such a chance to see, like, if everyone panics, which we should be panicking about climate crisis, for example, which COVID is a part of, right? These things are going to keep happening. It showed that we can, like, stop everything and, like, kind of do things in another way. And so I'm so disheartened that people are, like, rushing back to this kind of normal that got us here in the first place, when we really need to kind of make a 180 and do things in a different way before it's too late.
It's quite interesting. I mean, I guess we should have anticipated that this rush to quote unquote normality was going to happen, because it's not in the interest of capital writ large, to do this kind of change, in which, because I mean, note, for example, when we had a definition of essential workers in the US, and the essential workers were defined not as, like the people who are usually defined that way, such as stockbrokers or whoever, is making a tremendous amount of money, but people who were delivering food and serving food and growing food and things like this, because of course it was back to the fundamentals, right? The people who kept the electricity flowing and the water flowing. This was unavoidable because, the material situation revealed to everybody, well, who actually is essential. But now what we're seeing is, I would say, a propaganda effort to undo that change in perspective, so that we just rush back to the same thing. One of the things that was fascinated me on Twitter was when people started posting pictures from the Delta Sky Lounge or something, like it's like, oh, I'm back to, flying for work and it's so good. And like, well, I won't comment on your personal feeling about that, but obviously that's a societal failure. If after all of this, the victory state is, oh, I'm back to flying 100 times a year. Like, well, you shouldn't be back to flying 100 times a year. Maybe you should fly no times a year, or very, very, very few times a year, because we cannot continue this. And ironically, Vanessa, it's the fact that the very technologies that people celebrate that made remoting possible are the technologies that now they're saying, well, it can't be done. Like, well, you've been doing it for 2 years. Now, obviously, being on Zoom all the time is taxing and tiring and weird, and we do need to be with people as safely as we can, or as best as we can. But it's probably better to be with your friends and your family than to be in an office, for example, or maybe not an office as often as people, were called upon to be in an office. It's different for, obviously, people who have professions such as teaching, and in which it's important to interact with your students, or other types of work in which it's a different situation. But we probably could reduce, not probably, we can reduce the number of people commuting and doing and consuming energy and so forth. I mean, we've shown that we can, but to do that means a restructuring of the system in a way that capital is not comfortable with, because it changes the order as it has been.
Yeah, but we need to change that order. There's a long history in psychoanalysis of, like, not commenting on society, thinking psychoanalytically, or politics, which I think is really not been useful to say the least, because I can't help but think of it that way. It's like, if you don't end up, like, addressing the symptom, there's going to be a bigger breakdown down the road. You can't just put a band-aid on it and go back to what you were doing, because you're going to end up in the same spot that you find yourself in now, or worse.
We desperately need the insights of psychoanalytic theorists, I think, in this area. And I would like to see more application of the at work towards the tech industry. What does it mean when people are so worshipful of a guy on a stage standing in front of a giant screen talking about software? I mean, that's a moment that needs to be interrogated. If you were to take someone from the ancient world and say, "Oh, well, here are all these people gathered, and here's this person, and here's this thing," I think that they would interpret that probably correctly because with their non-modern perspective, as well, this is a moment of worship, right? I think people would correctly. I think an ancient Greek would probably correctly interpret that as either or theater, like they would see it either as a moment of worship or as theater, which is what it is, right? And it's kind of a combination of the two, because the tech industry's entire, how do they put this, their way of approaching um, themselves and how they present themselves to us is as being outside of the bounds of the rest of the economy, of being special, of being the best of the best, of having abilities that are beyond our understanding, of doing things that are like magic. Um, People like me who break that down technically and explain why technically that is not true, or if it is true, not as true or true in a different way than they present it. I think that we also need help from people who do work like yours and like Dr. Millark, because uh, there's much more going on than obviously just the technical aspect of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely believe that everyone that can work from home should work from home because, like you said, it reduces commuting and that helps the environment. And we need to do that. Like I've moved, me and my husband decided about this time last year, okay, a year of this, it's going to continue this way. So we left the city and moved to the country. And I do
Mm-hmm.
all of my work remotely. I see clients remotely, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's been
Mm-hmm.
great, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's the way it needs to be, yeah, more often.
Yeah, and then the socializing with other humans, I think that should be reserved for, for loved ones. Because yeah, you absolutely do need to still do that. But yeah, I think it definitely should be reserved for loved ones, and not for, you say, corporate situations, which is what we've been compelled to do, um, uh, in order to earn our livings, in order to have a life, right? So when I was in the States, because I moved to the Netherlands with my wife, um, there were times as a consultant when I had a 2 hour commute one way. So like a round trip, 4 hour commute. And I was really only one jackknife truck away on a highway from having a 6 or 7 hour commute. It absolutely was known to happen. Um, One time I was stuck on the road for 15 hours because there was multiple accidents on the road. And then I was expected to get up the next morning and do that all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is madness, right? And so that, which gets me to another point, which is the use of technology, of the technologies that we do have. If they were tailored to human use, if they were tailored to what we actually need, then there's really some interesting things we could accomplish. But right now, they're tailored to the needs of the corporations that own them. So machine learning, for example, we have a desperate need to analyze the Earth's atmosphere. We have a desperate need to analyze the effects of climate change locally, because, of course, there's a difference between climate and weather, as we know. What if this computational power was opened up to be to people, to be used to determine what their local situation was, uh, rather than it being, the exclusive territory of major corporations, for example, or of militaries. So there's an insane amount of capability that is locked away behind the wall of profit. And so I'm not negative on technology, which what some people accuse me of being. I am an advocate for the democratic use and democratic control of technology. One of the things that I look back to is the CyberSyn project that was in Chile in the 1970s, which was an early example of trying to use computer technology to help governments make smart choices, help citizens make smart choices. It was a very iterative process. And I've begun studying the classic works of cybernetics, which is quite exciting because I didn't realize that the early cyberneticians like understood this in the 1940s and 50s, that the work of complex systems and how to tailor, how to how would I put this? It's not command and control, but adapting to the environment. It's quite exciting because it's a vision for what computation could be, liberated from the bounds of capitalism.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, and I think of that too, like how does it coincide at this moment? Because I'm getting to where I can't have my denial mechanism work so well in the morning when I make my coffee. I'm like, maybe my podcast should only be about technology and the environment. That's what we need to be talking about all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I completely forgot what I was going to say. That's the point.
Yeah. No, you're right. And particularly since I'm sure you recall that there was a moment in the history of Britain when the common lands were denied to the people. The enclosing of the commons, of course, is, I guess, the phrase that's used to describe that. Because, prior to the rise of capitalism, it was possible for people to have a common area for farming and for cultivating land held in common. And I think under the feudal system, of course, it was understood that one of a noble's responsibilities was to provide this land and to not interfere with it. This is not to say that the feudal system was good or perfect, but one of the things that happened during the transition to capitalism was the enclosing of these lands and then the placing of them within private hands, so that then people had to use their wage labor to be able to farm, and they were doing so for other people, not for themselves, not to grow what they needed for their family. I feel the same way about computation. There was a moment when I was quite young when it felt as if computation was an opportunity for humanity. And then as the years have rolled by, it became clear to me that there was an enclosing of this technological commons, so to speak. Now, it's kind of a poison chalice in some ways, because we know that the history of computation is bound up with military objectives. But even so, I think there was a moment when it at least seemed as if the technology that we use was going to be deployed for people in common. But it's quite clear that that's not the case now, that the social media platforms that we depend upon, for example, they're not ours. We use them because it's good to communicate. I wouldn't have met you without them. But wouldn't it be better if it was a public utility, without any need to advertise or push advertisement to us, just a means of communication, the use of the technology stack to help a society be knit together in a different way. And so that's what I'm advocating for. That's what I'm advocating for and what I'm actually kind of fighting for is the building of that common tech stack, not the trashing of the machines, but the liberation of the potential of the machines for all of us, for human need rather than for profit.
No, that's beautiful. And that's exactly what I was going to say, that I was thinking that I had forgotten, was that we have this moment while there is a crisis environmentally that we all can communicate, and kind of have this opportunity to be able to work together in this way, and also to be aware of what's going on with all the different societies around the world in a way that we haven't been able to before, because we're not just relying on news to tell us what's going on, but we can have people saying for themselves, no, this is what's going on in Palestine, or this is what's going in Ukraine. People can talk for themselves instead of just relying on the media. So we have this amazing opportunity in that way to communicate with one another.
Yes, absolutely. And the problem, and that of course is a good thing, but the problem is that it is mediated and controlled by entities, organizations that do not have our best interests at heart. Someone said to me once that when you're on social media, you should always remember that you are within enemy territory. Because the terrain has been laid out by those who do not have your best interest at heart. Now, that does not mean that every tech worker within, Twitter or whatever is like some evil person. But the purpose of the platform is not to further, human development. It's a means of doing advertising and things like that. The communication that we can do is an emergent property, but it's something that's also exploited. And so again, this is why it's important to advocate for systems that do not have that liability, that are not held back by the desire or the need to advertise something to you. How many times, for example, do you have to click on "I don't like this ad" on Twitter, and then it comes back and so forth and so on. And let us not even speak of Facebook or Meta or whatever you want to call it. I mean, we all know that that's just the worst, right? So, and TikTok, I mean, all these things. I mean, there's potential in all of them, and because human beings are very creative and route around damage, often people are actually finding that. But through algorithmic manipulation, we also know that people are being encouraged towards things that lead them down dark paths. If there was no algorithm recommending anything to you, would people have the same path from normal curiosity about a topic to Nazi sympathies? I mean, we don't know, but somehow I doubt it. If it was just a platform, if these platforms, especially Facebook, if it was just something that you could just use to talk to your friends and family and meet new people on your own terms, I suspect there'd be far less of that sort of thing, because there'd be no mechanism pushing you in a certain direction in order to keep you glued, in order to serve you up to advertisers.
Are there ideas of ways that we can move towards this more kind of public use of the platforms?
Every time I say this, people, I actually wrote about this a little while ago, when I wrote an essay called "Public Cloud as a Public Good," in which I think I laid out, it's on my blog, in which I lay out an idea for how this can be achieved. But there are others, who actually certainly have ideas. I know that here in Europe, there are people who have been trying to build, cloud platforms, or what I should say, utility computing, to be specific and grounded. Utility computing platforms that are not tied to these corporate majors. That would be the foundation. That would be the material foundation. Would be actually building computation. A more radical approach would be to nationalize, say, these platforms. But as we know, that would be a massive political struggle, which I'm certainly not against, but I don't know how one would even start that, and I don't know what the outcome would be. But the construction of an alternative that would be publicly owned and publicly managed and democratically controlled, I think, would be the starting point. I mean, there are platforms like Mastodon, for example, that are designed to be something like this, like not fixated on profit. So there are people actually doing visions.
Great. Is there anything else that you wanted to be sure to mention before we wrap up?
The one thing I would say is when your listeners read a news story about something, a technology story that purports that a company has accomplished something that seems incredible, particularly in the area of so-called artificial intelligence and so forth, be skeptical. Be skeptical and ask yourself, well, is it possible? Can it be achieved as they describe? Who benefits from the deployment of this technology, and why are they promoting it? And if you keep those points foremost in your mind, I think that you have a good starting point, a good beginning tool set for sort of piecing apart the claims that are made by the tech industry.
Yeah, and I would say if they want to look more into it, they should go to your blog and see what you said about it. That's what I do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Dwayne Monroe. For more, be sure to check out his website and blog, monroelab.net. And follow him at Twitter @CloudCoistador. And stay tuned for his book, Attack Mannequins, AI as Propaganda. As always, you can also follow me at Instagram and Twitter at rawsin_, that's RAWSIN_, and I have recently joined TikTok at Dr. Vanessa Sinclair 23. And now here's a track called A Poem for the Poet, which was from a compilation created for Genesis Briar Peorage called Not in My Future. You can find the compilation on Bandcamp at contemporaryartists.bandcamp.com. And again, links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. So now, a poem for the poet. Enjoy.
That time has come when time moves on amidst a brave creator, amidst a bold narrator of magics and journeys of loved ones now gone. The trip is just beginning. Just drifting, shifting shapes. Get a new suitcase. Travel in style. All of this is possible all of the time. Let's never forget the messenger. The message, the process, the temple, intricate details, intuitive twists, curved hand, crooked smile, Baba Mago Supreme, calling on the spirits to become who you are, with sacred intent. Undoubtedly, his name was Master. Undoubtedly, her name was Master. What a blessed honor to move on in your mischievous company. Loyalty does not end with death. You cut it up so well. Scissors and glue, scissors and glue. Your sparkling supernova express still shines somewhere. And here, and now. In the morning after the night, I fall in love with the light. First it was, then it knew it was, and that was